when you see them on the screen is one thing, but when you see them in reality, it's very, very different. When you're there, there's no rules. There's no rules in Gaza. The hospital was blown up, the Turkish hospital, the only cancer hospital. Then they bombed Nasser hospital and killed patients. Then they bombed the UN safe house and killed international aid workers. Then they executed the paramedics. Then they bombed the hospital that I was in. This is all while we're there. All of these factors, they strike your heart and you begin to realize that I could die here. I really could die right here. You know, even as a grown man, I was shaking the first few times that I saw children with their heads missing. When the mother comes in and the father, and they start crying, and then they're picking up the body and hugging it. I'm just there, I'm thinking, where am I? This is like a horror film. And I got into an ambulance with one of the paramedics. This was about 3 days after they found the bodies of those paramedics that had been executed. And I said to him, you're not scared, you know, because you're a paramedic. And he said, I was the one that collected their bodies. And I said, what was that like? You know, you're not scared that that'll be you one day? And he just said to me, you know, we're already dead. He said, we're already dead here.
Dr. Mohammed Mustafa, Jazakallah khair, thank you for being with us. You've been to Gaza twice.
Yeah.
What was the moment, the turning point that made you decide, I have to go to Gaza?
You know, where do you want to start? Do you want to start from the human point of view, the religious point of view? You know, for me, watching so many children crying and limbs blown off and starvation and the destruction, I wanted to do more than just speak. I wanted to put words into actions. So that's why I wanted to go. But going into Gaza and saying you want to go into Gaza are two different things. You know, talking the talk and walking the walk are very different because, you know, when I was applying, I felt okay. But as soon as I had someone say to me, right, you're going into Gaza, that's it. It all changed because then the reality of, oh, actually I am going into Gaza. I could die going into Gaza. Now I need to prepare the next phase, you know, of talking to my mother, getting permission off her, you know, to go into Gaza before I go in, preparing all the passwords and giving them to my financial advisor and my dad and, you know, writing a will. All of these things then became a reality. And then the more I did that, the more it hit home. You know what I mean? And then when you go into Jordan, from Jordan into Israel, Israel into Gaza, and you go through the military checkpoints, and then when you get to Gaza, you know, you have to pick up your bags and you have to walk into Gaza on the border to go to the car that's waiting to take you into Gaza. And you're walking through the military security checkpoint. So then you walk between the tanks and the soldiers as you have to walk carrying your bags into Gaza. And then it becomes real at that stage.
How did your family and friends take it? I mean, what was the conversation that you had with your mother?
It was a difficult conversation. You know, I said to her, Mama, I'm going to Gaza in 5 days. That's when I got the notice that I was going to Gaza. And she started crying. And I couldn't understand what she was saying because she was crying so much. But she said, let me call you back. And, you know, 15 minutes passed. And then she called me back and she said to me, Hamada, which is the name that she calls me, she said, death is in the hands of Allah, it's not in the hands of Israel. So I'm going to leave you in the hands of Allah.
La ilaha illallah.
Yeah. And yeah, she said, I'm not gonna stand in the way of your reward for doing this. I know this is something you've always wanted to do, so just go.
Can you describe to us, I mean, you've walked past the tanks, carrying your stuff.
Yeah.
What was your first day like?
You know, as soon as we got into that minibus the first time in June, and we went in, it was at the height of the war, and there was little food, and there was literally the first 500 meters, there was dogs eating bodies on the floor. And I remember just thinking, literally 500 meters away, there's forests and greenery and, you know, farms just outside Gaza, and they look so beautiful. And then literally 500 meters in, and you have dogs eating humans. The contrast was just startling. And when we arrived to the hospital, this was in June, the first time that I went, we had a mass casualty event, and it was, everyone that arrived was dead. So, you know, we went and helped them carry the bodies. This was literally the first 5 minutes I arrived in the hospital, carrying the plastic bags of bodies. And it was a whole family. And I remember just thinking how confronting this is, because when you see them on the screen is one thing, but when you see them in reality, it's very, very different. You smell the burning, from the flesh, and the clothes have burnt into the flesh. You smell, the smell sticks in your nose. When you see children with their brains hanging out, and you have to scoop part of their brain back in and wrap up the head because the parents are about to come see the child, and you want to try and give them a little bit of dignity. It changes your perspective. It really hits home because you feel this fear because you see this human so mutilated, and you begin to get scared of like the pain that this person must have been through, the burns, the limb half missing, the brain hanging out. And it really hits home that they say there's no winners in war, but when you see children this mutilated, it's confronting and it's very scary. Even as a grown man, my hand was shaking the first few times that I saw children with their heads missing, because you have to pick up the body, to put it in the plastic bag. When you pick up this 2-year-old's body and the head's missing, it's very different holding it, feeling the weight, the blood dripping down, the intestines hanging out. And that's a human being. And then when the mother comes in and the father, and they start crying, and then they're picking up the body and hugging it, and you just, I'm just there, and I'm thinking, where am I? This is like a horror film. They're hugging a headless corpse to their child. These things are really, really confronting, and you have to be there to experience this level of this level of death. It's something else.
Did you fear for your own life that you wouldn't be able to make it out alive from Gaza?
They bombed the hospitals when we were there. The second time round when I was there, the hospitals were being bombed. We had another mass casualty event from within the hospital. When the hospital was bombed, we had people from within the hospital coming into the emergency department. There was times where I thought, this was it. There was plenty of times I called my mother and told her to forgive me if I ever let her down. It was really confronting, but I'd gone in. The thing that I was most scared about was my intention, was my niyyah. I would always keep saying, Allah, I don't mind whatever the outcome is, but just make sure that my intention is pure here. Because as long as my intention is pure, I'm in Gaza, it's Ramadan, I'm with the most blessed people ever, it's all good. I just want my intention to be good. That was the only thing that I really feared.
SubhanAllah. What were the conditions like working within the hospitals?
Yeah.
And how do you compare the first trip to the second trip?
So, the hospitals, there's no thermometer, especially in the north. When I was in the north, there's not a single ventilator in the emergency department. There is there's one working blood pressure cuff and monitor. There's one ECG machine. The beds, the wheels are broken, so you can't really move people too much. The suctioning device is this small suctioning device, and when you have people come in and they're coughing up blood and you're trying to intubate them and put a tube down their throat, this small suction, it doesn't even suck up blood. So we ended up, just putting our hands in and scooping blood out of their mouths to try and see where the vocal cords are, just so we can get a tube in. So, the lack of medical equipment was a big issue. The difference between this time round and the other time round, the presentations that we would see, the first time I was there, we were at the height of the war, where there'd been 9 months of starvation of, maybe 50 aid trucks a day, 100 aid trucks a day. So we used to see a lot of children coming in starving to death, especially, kids that have, maybe they have cerebral palsy or things like that, where they struggle anyway with food. And we would see them so cachexically thin, like skin and bones. And they would just come in and they would already essentially be dead. They're just waiting to die, and there's nothing that you could offer them because there was no painkillers or anything like that. All you could do was just comfort the family. You couldn't even comfort the child. You just had to comfort the family through this death while they would watch their child die. And this time round, the intensity of the bombing was way more this time round, since the resumption of the war, than last time. You know, there were some days where we had no work. Some days, everybody that arrived to the hospital was dead. Melted bodies. You couldn't even tell what was somebody's leg and what was somebody's arm. It was just disintegrated.
Ya Latif.
Yeah. So, yeah, there's
Ya Latif. You know, Israel continuously denies that they are targeting civilians in a lot of their coverage.
Yeah.
Having been on the ground, what was your experience like with the casualties, with the patients? Were they civilians?
So, you know, when the ceasefire was there, because I arrived during the ceasefire the second time around before it broke, and we used to see children with single gunshot wounds to the head, gunshot wounds to the neck, and when we would scan the head, the bullet would be a trajectory of downwards, and it's from the drones up above, and they would shoot, and it would hit the child directly in the head. And this would be at night when they'd be sleeping in their tents. It would come down and it would shoot them. Sometimes it would be when a family would be walking through the markets, and it would be the youngest child that was targeted from all the family, just one bullet to the youngest child to their head. That's what we used to see. That was the stories that they used to tell us. You know, when they'd come into the hospital, they'd say, we were just walking, and my other kids, one shot to this child. So that was before the ceasefire broke. We were seeing that. And then after the ceasefire broke, there was even a UN report of over like 30 missile strikes that just had women and children casualties. And the majority of people that we saw were women and children. The majority of the casualties were just the women and children.
Civilians?
Civilians, yeah. I remember when there was a man and we picked him up and we put him on the bed. And I got my pocket ultrasound and I was scanning his chest. And I found that his chest was filled with blood. So I got my knife and I cut through his chest to try and get a chest tube in. And while I was doing that, someone grabbed my leg, and it was a woman. And I looked down and she was reaching out to me and she was saying, "Sa'idni," and her face was burnt as well. She had a severed leg. And, you know, I'm in the middle of cutting this guy's lungs open, his chest open. So I'm like, all right, I need to secure the tube and then I'll see her. And as I'm securing the tube and tying it up, she's still holding my ankle, but I look down and she's bled to death on the floor. She bled to death holding my ankle. And every day I think about that woman. Every day I think that I let her down because I chose to help him and leave her. And I have to live with that. I have to live with that guilt every day. And a lot of people will say it's not your fault and you did your best. But when you make a decision like that, you know what I mean? I chose not to help her and to help him. And these are the decisions that have to haunt you for the rest of your life when you go there. So, may Allah forgive me sometimes for the decisions that I had to make when I was there.
SubhanAllah. I mean, with a lot of the patients that you saw and treated, what was, especially the children, what was the psychological state like of those that survived?
You know, I remember walking through the wards at night and you would hear screams. And it was children screaming, PTSD, just frightened. I walked into a room once and it was very warm, so I opened the window. Because the drones are always in the sky, you hear them, the buzzing of the drones. This child just jumped under the bed and I asked what's wrong, and he said that, you know, a drone had gone in and it had released a grenade and it killed his brother in front of him and his mother in front of him as well, and it left him with very severe burns on his face, and it burned his hands and face. And ever since then, he's scared of the window, and if the window's open, he can't stay in the room if the window's open. So there's a real psychological trauma to a lot of these children.
SubhanAllah. I mean, the United Nations has accused Israel of having a targeted starvation campaign.
Mm-hmm.
As a doctor on the ground, dealing with patients and survivors, what was that like? Did you see any starvation? What was the situation like?
So like I say, the first time around when I was there was so much starvation. This time around, people had had food for 40 days. But even then, you know, when I was there towards the final couple of weeks, which, you know, had been about 4 weeks of the blockade, we were down to one hot meal a day. And I remember this one incident where this woman had given me some bread and some cheese to take on my last day, when I was leaving, because the journey sometimes takes 12 hours to go from Gaza back to Jordan because of all the security checks. So she gave me some bread and cheese and she went, "Oh, this is so you can make some sandwiches so you're not hungry." And I remember saying to her, I said, "They're not even allowing food into Gaza. How do you want me to take food out of Gaza?" But that was their generosity, She was like, "Inta doctor, and you're a doctor and you've helped us, and the least we can do is feed you." And I was thinking, I'm going to Jordan. When I get there, there'll be shawarma, there'll be knafa, there'll be tropical, there'll be everything that I want. I went, "You keep the khubz and the jibna, you keep the bread and the cheese." But I remember just thinking to myself, subhanAllah, like they were willing to give me food as I was leaving Gaza.
What was it like dealing with the Gazans, the people of Gaza?
Oh, Wallahi, you learn something new every day with them. When I was in Gaza, I would always make sure that I was praying my prayers on time, because you don't know when death's going to come, and I didn't want to, delay a prayer, knowing that something could happen and meet Allah having missed the prayer. So I would always pray my prayers on time. But the thing that drove me to pray my prayers on time was fear of death. But when I went and I got into an ambulance with one of the paramedics, and he saw me on the street walking to work from the safe house, and he saw that I had my Australia flag and my British flag on my thing and my stethoscope. So he said, "Doctor, where are you?" Like, "Doctor, where are you going?" And I said, "Oh, I'm going to the hospital." And he said, "Well, let me give you a ride." So this was about 3 days after they found the bodies of those paramedics that had been executed. And I said to him, "Well, you're not scared, because you're a paramedic?" And he said, "I was the one that collected their bodies." And I said, "What was that like?" And I said, "All this time, you're not scared that that'll be you one day?" And he just said to me, "We're already dead." He said, "We're already dead here." He goes, "We're already dead. It's just a matter of when Allah chooses for us." And he was just happy. And I remember thinking to myself, there I was doing this ibadah out of fear. And he was doing this ibadah out of tawakkul. He was happy with the will of Allah, whatever it was. He wasn't praying because of fear. He was praying because, he was happy with Allah and he was content. I remember thinking to myself, wow, I thought I was, getting up for Fajr every day, praying all my sunnah rak'ahs, and, because I was praying the Taraweeh, Qiyam Layl, I was like, yeah, I'm good, I'm doing, but I was doing that out of fear was a driving factor. But for him, he was like, we're already dead, khalas, ihna mayteen, we're dead. But, we just have to tawakkul on Allah, whatever Allah's plan is, we're happy with. And that for me was a real teaching moment.
SubhanAllah. You mentioned the Australian and the British flag.
Yeah.
Did you receive any support from the Australian government or the British government during your time inside Gaza?
We reached out to the Australian government because when we were scared, that something was going to happen, but we didn't really hear back. And we didn't even reach out to the British government, to be honest. So Australian government was probably a bit better than the British government. But when you're there, there's no rules. There's no rules in Gaza. When we were there, the hospital was blown up, the Turkish hospital, the only cancer hospital. Then they bombed Nasser Hospital and killed patients and destroyed the surgical unit. Then they bombed the UN safe house and killed international aid workers. Then they executed the paramedics. This is all while we're there. Then they bombed the hospital that I was in, and you just got this sense that and then, you'd have days where everyone would arrive, they'd be dead. And the ferocity of the bombing was just that intense. And, you'd get yourself into this state where you were just like, I don't even know how I'm going to make it out here. We've got international aid workers dying, hospitals being blown up, paramedics being executed. We're sending out emails and calls to get people to, realize or talk to us, and we're getting nothing back. And that's when it makes it really real. And, when you see death, and you see these violently mutilated bodies from these missiles, all of these factors, they strike your heart, and you begin to realize that I could die here. I really could die right here. But I just kept saying to myself, like, I'm here to help, and I've already accepted whatever fate comes my way. And I've just got to focus on the mission, and the mission is to help those children.
With the Australian federal election around the corner,
Yeah.
what would be your message to the Australian Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister, having been in Gaza?
It's difficult because I know everybody knows the truth about what's going on. They're probably more informed than we are about the death and destruction. I think there are a lot of elements outside of our control and outside of their control of what they can do. But I feel like we should be honest about how we frame this. Palestinian children don't die. They're slaughtered. They're targeted. Cutting off food, water, and electricity is a war crime. It's not pressure on the other side. It's a war crime on the other side. And if we're not honest about it, we can never change it. Because if I'm telling you that 2 + 2 is 4 and you're telling me it's 5, how do we solve the problem? We've got to be honest. And I think just being honest can really bridge the gaps between communities. If I at least can acknowledge your pain and tell you that, yep, this is what's happening, is happening, it reinforces, you're not being gaslit, which is the word everyone likes to use, but we need to stop being gaslit, essentially.
Do you have a specific message for the Prime Minister?
Sit down and talk to me. Sit down, talk to me, talk with an Australian aid worker that went there. We had an Australian aid worker that was killed, Zomi. She was killed for the crime of feeding children, and nothing's happened for that. So we have Australians that have died in Gaza, aid workers that died. I'm an aid worker. I want to sit down with him. I'm also Muslim as well. I'm Arabic as well. Let's talk about how we bridge the gap in our community. Because at the end of the day, I need the Prime Minister on my side if I need to make a change. People want to attack and people want to say he needs to do more or he's not using enough words of condemnation and this, that, and the other. But when you've been to Gaza and you've seen the death and destruction, I don't even want to criticize anymore. I just want to say, help. Just help me. Even if you can bring in just 1 cup of water, the destruction and the devastation to these people, even a lollipop for a child, I'll take it. I'll take it just to relieve just an inch of suffering in Gaza. I don't care about the politics of it. I don't care about whether whether you do sanctions or I don't care. I just want to help, whatever that is, and I need them on my side. So I'm trying not to criticize anyone or anything. I'm not even trying to criticize the other side. I just want people to be more unified in humanizing these people. There was an incident that really affected the way that I thought about this whole conflict. And it was when a man had come in on a donkey cart with his children that had just been hit by a missile strike. And when we opened the blankets, like, one of his children had a missing head, the other one had a severed arm, and she was bleeding out to death. And he was screaming for help. And this donkey began to urinate because it was, I don't know whether it was just scared of all the talking, but it looked disorientated. And then when it urinated, the urine covered these children in urine. And I remember thinking to myself, subhanAllah, look how humiliated this man must feel. For months, he's been living in a tent. He's been begging for food for his children. And then look at the way that his children have been killed. And then when he comes to try and get help for them, and they're dying and bleeding out to death, an animal urinates over them. What does that do to him? And when people talk about, we need to do this, I just want that not to happen. I just don't want that to happen, okay? We can talk about everything else later, but I want that to stop. Because no one should be humiliated like that. No one should watch their children be, essentially defecated on. And dogs eating eating humans, eating those people on the streets. That's what's happening. That's the reality. And people can get caught up in words and politics and boycott and this, that, and the other. But the reality is we need to humanize these people again. We need to give them dignity again. And if you can give me a blanket, you can give me some food, you can give me some medicine, I'll take it. I'll take whatever you're giving, because the situation is so desperate right now in Gaza.
SubhanAllah, it must be heartbreaking, some of the horrors that you've witnessed there. I mean, from your perspective, having seen what's gone on the ground, where does accountability begin? What's the road to justice?
Well, the ultimate justice is with Allah. You know, that's the ultimate justice. I don't think there can ever be justice for what happened in Gaza, not from what I've seen. But I think, you know, if we can't change, you know, things with our hands, we change it with our mouths, and if we can't, then it's with our hearts. And one thing that I learned when I was over there was I need to be a better Muslim. You know, I need to be a better Muslim. And I think that's one thing that we can all take, because once we correct ourselves, Allah will correct the rest. And I know that might sound like one of those, like a bit of a flimsy answer, but I think it's the truth, because they never would have been in that position if we were all unified and we stood up for them and we never let them be in that position.
SubhanAllah. Now that, you've been to Gaza twice and now you're back in Australia, what's the transition been like for you?
I really haven't slept very much since coming back, because I've been trying to raise as much awareness of what's going on in Gaza. And the reason is because I've just, when I was leaving Gaza, there were children in tents that had brain injuries from buildings falling on them, and they were slipping in and out of consciousness, and they had skull fractures. And there was many of them like this. And they were in a tent, sometimes on their own, because their whole family was dead. And they're slipping in and out of consciousness. We can't even monitor their breathing. We can't even monitor their blood pressure the whole time while they're in this tent. And I know if I rest, more and more of them are going to die in those tents. So that's why I'm just doing as much as I can while I'm back, you know. There is one part of it where I'm there helping, but the other part of it is I need to get something. I need to get something for these people. I need to do something for these people. If I can just move the conversation a little bit this way, if I can get a little bit of extra aid in this way, but we've got to tell their story. I've got to try and humanize these people again to the wider audience. And that includes our community as well. You know, there's a lot of faults that our community has made as well. You know, when Zomi died, the Muslim community didn't rally around her family, and we should have. You know, she was out there feeding Muslim children, and she died feeding Muslim children. There's a lot of Muslims that wouldn't have made the sacrifice that she made, and we left her and her family, and that upsets me. You know, so we're not perfect in this either. You know, we're not the perfect victims either. There's a lot of mistakes that we made as well, and we all need to work together. We need to come together. We need to unify, because when I tell you, it's, you know, people say on the Day of Judgment, they won't have any ta'deeb. There won't be any recourse for those people in Gaza. You know, it'll be an easy day for them, and you can understand why when you go there, because it is everywhere you look, there's death and destruction and pain and suffering.
There was a video of yourself that went quite viral when you were describing the situation in one of the hospitals, dressed in green, and people around the world had seen that. What did that moment feel like for you?
I think when I was filming it, because I opened up my social media, I like to be private, you know, as I've got older in life. But I opened up my social media when I went into Gaza. Part of it was to raise funds on my GoFundMe, because I was bringing in medical equipment and I was doing some projects on the ground. So I was just documenting, you know, what I was doing and the mission. And, you know, this time I just picked up the camera and I was just like, I can't believe what's happened. And I, you know, I'm in Gaza, I'm alone here at the hospital. I've just left the emergency department after like 10, 11 hours of just constantly, and I was exhausted. And I wanted to say like what was on my heart. I didn't know who to speak to, I wanted to cry, I was scared, and I just picked up the phone and I just, recorded and talked about what happened that night. And I went to sleep for like 3 hours and went back down to the emergency department, and I had a look at my phone and like there was just thousands of messages, and I was thinking, what's going on? Do people think I'm dead or something like that? Like, what's happening? And it just, the video had went viral and celebrities were sharing it around the world, and big pages on social media. It made news headlines. There was an MP here in Australia who quoted the video and was crying while she was talking in a parliamentary house. I was just shocked at like the response for it. And, since then there's been an outpouring of a lot of love and a lot of support. And then I thought to myself, well, I've got to use this support and love and try and get something tangible out of it, I opened up my social media to raise awareness, and this wasn't the intention, but here we are. And then since then I've been like, right, I've got the ball, run with it, see what we can do.
May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow you to be a person of impact and change. If I can ask you, Dr. Muhammad, your experience in Gaza, how has that changed you as a man?
I want to think hopefully a better person, but I think there's going to be a lot of things that I'm going to have to deal with privately, after this. And that's going to be the hard thing. And I think the only way that I can really deal with it is knowing that I made a change. But I think, I think there's a lot of damage that's probably happened to me mentally. But I also think I've been liberated spiritually from this. When you've seen death so many times and you've seen how evil it is and how bad it can be, everything seems okay. People cut me in line, people, make death threat. It just doesn't mean anything anymore. When you've seen that, alhamdulillah, I'm grateful for everything in life.
May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward all your efforts. And the reminder for us is that as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, whoever does an atom's worth of good shall see it. So nothing goes unnoticed with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Dr. Muhammad Mustafa, Jazakallah khair for your time. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless your efforts and make you an agent of change.
Allah yakhallik. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.